In our previous lectures, we discussed a very core insight, that you are not inside of your visual field, that a camera is not inside of its own photographs. Now, this insight is very foundational indeed. If you have not taken some time to meditate on this, contemplate this, I really encourage you to do so. We're going to unravel a lot more implications that come from this insight, but that first one really is at the core of it, is the initial seed. And in a sense, everything else that we will discuss is a logical offshoot of that truth. So if you haven't investigated that, it's going to be difficult to really interface or take seriously anything else that we're going to discuss in terms of the visual field. So I highly encourage you to do so. Investigate, investigate, investigate. So, as I said, everything that we're going to discuss, very much a logical offshoot, but please allow me to make myself useful and try to guide you through some of this. So in the past two lectures, we discussed how you are not inside your visual field, and then we tackled one of the most common hangups with that insight, which is that your body is within the visual field. And let's just say that we get it. It's like, all right, I get it. Even though the body is down there dangling below the empty space of my head in the visual field, I am not inside of my visual field. Let's look at some of the implications. One of the primary ones is that there is no one who sees sights. So when we say you are not inside the visual field, that you that isn't there is quite a big you. It's a you with a capital Y. It's not some small thing. It's a big deal that you is not there. We impute ourselves being positioned inside of the visual field. We infer our presence. The us that we are inferring is this self, this center of gravity that is the aggregate result of our sense impressions, our thoughts, our proprioception, our sense of balance, all of the flickering sensations that crawl across our body. It's important to make clear that that self is not any one of those individual sensations, right? I am not denying that there is that flickering on your knee, right? I'm not denying that there is those electrical impulses. I am not denying that there is a useful relationship between where you seem to be in the visual field and my vacuum cleaner over there behind the camera. You know, I can infer with good certainty that vacuum cleaner is about 4 paces away, and then I can locomote over to it based on that. I am not denying the usefulness or the just as suchness of the appearances of any of those individual things. What we are calling into question here is what is implied by all of those sensations, by all of those inferences, that self that floats on top of everything. So that is not present in the visual field. And that means that for all of the things that you see, right, your rug, your television, whatever art piece you're working on, a friend, a lover, anything like that, there is no one who sees those things, not in terms of experience. So again, this this chorus of disclaimer that is going to come up again and again, I am not denying that there is no body in some ultimate sense or a person, right? I'm not denying that. You are a person with a history. You have a bank account. You have a social security number. You do have to pay taxes. Render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. And your mother knows the difference between you and your sister. But in terms of experience, sights do not need to be seen by anybody. So, this coaster that I have here, if I hold it up in front of me, I can ask the question, who sees this? Who sees this? And there is a common sense notion that this is an object and it requires my presence here in the visual field to see it. And again, in terms of the science, which we are not denying, in terms of the hypothetical ultimate realm of the real world, that is to say, the hard molecules and atoms that outside of our experience are indeed bumping into each other and exchanging chemical reactions, and photons are bouncing off of these atoms and Higgs fields and fluctuations in the wave function, all of this. We're not saying that is not happening, but we are saying that in terms of experience, there's no one here who needs to see this sight. The seeing of the sight, the seeing of this coaster is merely a given. It is built in to the sight itself. So sight and seeing are one. Even to imply the separation between the sight and the seeing of the sight is at core an error of understanding the nature of experience. It is a core delusion. There is merely disappearance, and it arises from nowhere. We will come back to these notions, but upon inspection, it does not arise. It does not arise, it does not stick around, and it doesn't disappear either. It just, there it is. Now, this is a rather common pointing instruction towards non-dual understanding in many mystical traditions, specifically in like Zen, other forms of Buddhism. You hear it all the time. You may have done meditation practices where it is explicitly asked of you, look for the one who is looking, right? So let's untangle that instruction a little bit. You are told, either by a book or a meditation teacher or something like this, look for the one who is looking. And there's stages there. So the first stage is often just raw frustration. What does that even mean? One at first can feel so identified intuitively with their own thoughts that they cannot get enough distance on things to even understand what that means. Look for the one who is looking. It's just a given. It's me. I'm looking. And it's obvious that I'm there. The question seems beneath notice. A bit more experience in meditation, either through this looking practice or through Vipassana, insight meditation, something like this, a meditation where you notice the nature of your thoughts moment after moment after moment after moment, tends to produce in people an understanding that they are not their thoughts, that the linguistic stream of narrative that flows through their mind moment to moment, it doesn't have to be linguistic, it can also be images, sort of emotional cocktails of worry, anxiety, hope, things like this. they realize that that's not them in some complete sense. And this creates an initial distance that often takes on the energy of being an observer. You are this sort of eternal witness to experience that sees things come and go. And that's a very useful stage, and that's very freeing on its own. Even to call it a stage is a little off, because it's useful enough that for a lot of people, that might be the antidote you need for your particular pain or suffering. There's nothing anywhere saying that, this is above or below anything else and that you should move on or anything like that. But that disclaimer aside, let us look a little deeper into this. So upon further analysis, deeper analysis, one can find what we discussed, which is, I believe, the what is more being indicated by the pointing instruction, look for the looker. The point there is not actually to find a looker. It's not to discover that you are this witness to whom sights appear. Because that is still very much like the common sense notion. No, what is to be noticed here is that there is no looker. You go looking for the looker and you fail to find them. The first time experiencing this, having this land correctly on experience, can be highly energetic, can produce a very strong sense of freedom, which is beautiful, but it can be difficult to unravel, well, what does this mean? It can just be you're just on that trip for a while. But let's look at what it means. So, if there is no looker, if there is nothing you can put your finger on to say, within experience, to say, this is the one who sees, right? My view of the camera now, where does it land? I go looking. Does it land in the implied sense that I am behind my eyeballs? No, it does not. That is just a weird proprioceptive illusion, right? Does it land in the whole sphere of perception? No, it does not even land there. How could it? Does it land on my heart? Does it land on my butt sitting on this couch? Does it land in my brain, sort of where I can't see my cranium, but there is a common sense notion that I sort of am my brain, even though my brain is not present in experience at all. Does it land there? No. Again, my brain is not present in experience. Where does a sight make contact with the one who is seeing it? And the answer is absolutely nowhere. There is no one who is seeing it. There is just the sight. It is just there. This can get tied up with ideas that sort of everything in the visual field is emerging from raw consciousness, raw awareness. Again, forget saying that, but to experience that, which is an experience that's available. Experiencing that, either for a moment or for hours or for days, walking around, going through your life, and just all you can focus on is, oh my God, everything that I'm seeing, everything that I'm experiencing is sort of this crest and trough in a field of consciousness. Everything takes on this one flavor of just being consciousness or awareness. That is unbelievably beautiful, life-changing on its own. Again, as we said of getting distance from your thoughts, in many senses, it's enough. It really is enough. It can do an untold amount of good for you. But if we inspect even closer, look even closer, we can ask, well, it feels that way, but where is this consciousness? Where is this awareness from which these things emerge? What is this sense that there is a movie screen on which these images are being projected right? What is the base light from which these images are woven? And if we inspect very, 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 very closely and with an open heart and an open mind, we find even that is not there. The truth, we use truth lightly here, right? As I said in a previous video, we're not trying to prove these things are true in some ultimate sense. We are sort of exploring the truth of these particular experiences. In this experience, it can be seen that the images are more miraculous still, that they do not emerge from a field, that they are not being projected onto a base. There's no wall behind them on which they are being plastered. They merely present. The rawness of this presentation, the gall that these images have to merely manifest out of nothing, can be crushingly overwhelming. The raw possibility of that, the difficulty of understanding something like that, probably the impossibility of understanding something like that, can be a seismic shift, not just in how you view your visual perception, but how you view your entire life. All right. These appearances are no mere appearances. They are each individual one, the whole thing as an aggregation, just simply miraculous. Hard to describe, hard to talk about. Let's look at some of the other illusions implicit in this realization, in this understanding. One of my favorites is that the idea that things have insides is an illusion. All we ever see is surface. That's all there is. So I'm in a room right now, right? I'm inside of my apartment. So am I seeing the inside of my apartment? Well, when I look around me, no. All I see is surface, more surface, the surface of my vacuum cleaner, the surface of the walls, the surface of my computer, the surface of my skin and my clothes, the surface of my dog, the surface of my plants, the surface of my rug. All I ever see is surface. I only see the out. I never see the in, right? I only see the part that I can catch. So let's look at my hand for a second here. When I look at my hand, what do I see? Surface. I see the outside, right? Now, if I cup my hand, and now I'm looking into that little space on the inside of my hand. Inside, like I just said, right? Is that the inside of my hand? Have I produced a real inside? Well, no, that inside is just made of more outside. It's just made of more surface, right? So inside is imputed. It's implied. It's a construct. It's a fabrication. We project it on two things. And then you say, well, my dear Stephen, at that level, that is implied. But if I were to slice your hand open with a knife, we will prove very quickly that it has insides. Well, just consider, please don't actually slice my hand open, but feel free to imagine in as much gory detail as might be necessary. Imagine the experience, what actually occurs in experience if you were to cut my hand open, or any of me open, slice open my torso, if you would like. What do you find when you cut me open? Yeah. You find more surface, right? I mean, let's go as as real and practical and urgent and emergency as possible, right? You slice open my stomach and you start dragging out my entrails, right? Have you found my insides? Well, in terms of experience, even if you're holding one of my entrails, what do you see? More surface. You just see more surface. You impute, we both agree scientifically that in some conventional sense, you have my insides in your hands, and please put them back and get me to a hospital so that I can get sewn up. But in terms of experience, no inside has been found. This will go for absolutely anything that you cut open, right? Now, when you inspect something, you may find things of very different characters, very different materials, very different chemical compositions, but all you will ever experience, all you will ever see is more surface. If you were to touch the things inside, you would only ever touch the insides the same way that you touch the outsides of things. The interiority of things that we take as a given, that we feel so much moment to moment in the visual field, is an implication, purely implied. Let's say I have a tennis ball. I cut it open. I have two halves. What do I find on the inside of the tennis ball? More surface, two more planes, two circles that are the inside cuts of that tennis ball. If I take a scoop and I start scooping out the insides of one of the halves, no matter how many craters I make, as I dig more, all I ever find is more surface. Those craters are just more facing out. And then if I take a very small instrument, tiny tweezers, and I pull out just a particle of the inside, just a little tiny pebble that I can barely see, is that the inside of the tennis ball? No, that little pebble it's just surface. It's more surface area. It's more out. It's more outside. And if you want to then take it to the scientific level, if you want to take it down to the level of atoms, fields, the electromagnetic field, the Higgs boson generating mass, the Higgs field generating mass, any of that, right? You are by definition now going down into the realm where nothing can be seen. Right, so you are taking it out of the realm of visual experience. You are trying to find that which is the inside in a realm which is hypothetical to us. Again, in experience. I'm not denying the reality of those fields and particles, even though construing them as particles seems to be scientifically dubious. I'm not denying that, but they are by definition, you can't see them. They will never be present in your visual field, and their activities, their scientific nature, whatever they're doing in your visual field, by the time you experience it, is already done. As we discussed in the first video, you are looking at the past in some sense, moment to moment. So in terms of what we experience, there are only outsides. There's no insides. And of course, with no insides to contrast outsides against, both notions actually cancel, right? We need contrast to make sense of things. We cannot just have one thing in isolation. Everything is relative to us. Everything needs to be posited in terms of what it is not as well. This is how we demarcate things. So with a polarity, like inside versus outside, outside makes no sense without insides. Insides being unfindable negates the notion of outsides. And so we are once again left with startling rawness. Just a psychedelic panoply of manifestation. Just things arising, white, black, red, opalescent. Just, there it is. Even a notion like surface falls apart on this level, because a surface must be construed in terms of something underneath, right? So our language really falls apart. Any way that we try to phrase it is not going to work. We must give up at that point and merely marvel, yokel-like, at the suchness of what is delivered. Now, there's many other illusions in the visual field. I'm just looking around my room to remind me of the huge amount of them, to think of which one to talk about. So just to list some off the top of my head, perspective is an illusion. Distance is an illusion. Scale is an illusion. There's many more, but just, I tend to speak from the artistic mindset, from someone who draws, right? So the facts that perspective, space, and scale are illusions. I forget what I said the first time. I think I said perspective, distance, and scale. I should have said perspective, space, and scale. Distance is implied in perspective. So as an artist, it's very interesting to me, because I grapple with them so often, that perspective, space, and scale could be totally illusory. And there's many more, and we'll explore them. But before I talk about these three, let me just state again the base insight here, that if you can grok this, it's just a given that perspective, space, and scale are illusory. And that is that if you have seen... Sorry, my dog is dreaming. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. As you were. If you see that you are not inside of your visual field, which, again, we begin from the visual position, just because it's so urgent, and so many people, it's their base way of orienting themselves. And especially for artists, the visuals are, by definition, going to be very prominent, right? But you can apply the same thinking to each dimension of the sensorium, right? You are not inside your auditory field. You are not inside your proprioceptive or balance field. And you are not inside of your touch field, right? You are not... Again, what's the implication there with touch? It's like if I could somehow sum if I could get a very precise map of the extents of all of my touch sensations, right? Like the tip of my toe, the top of my head, the relative position of the surface of my back to the surface of my front. And then if I could run a very complicated mathematical process and divine the exact center of all those points, somehow a center of gravity almost, am I there? Is that me? At the very middle of all those points, is that where I am? And the answer is, of course, no. That notion does not map at all to the nature of being you. So you're not inside your visual field, your auditory field, your balance or proprioceptive field. You're not inside of your touch field. You're not inside of your thought field. You are not a sort of summing of the average nature of all of your thoughts that flicker in and out of experience. So that thinking, that logical lens can be applied to every aspect of your sensorium. So if you take that as a starting point, and you can accept that you are not in any of those, that you are not inside of any of those, you realize that all things that you could possibly experience are being created, generated, fabricated by the mind, by definition, right? Oops, apologies. Let me lower my volume here on this. All things are being fabricated by the mind. All things you experience. Again, I'm not presenting a hard idealist view here that denies the existence of something outside of mind. I personally believe that things do exist, outside of the mind, right? I don't think that if I were to die right now, that my the atoms or the molecules in my camera would disperse or anything like that. I do think that they have some consistency, and that if someone else walks into the room where I have died, they will find my camera, no problem. They will see my camera. And that seeing is not directly linked to, but dependent on photons bouncing off of whatever the hell it is makes up cameras. Yes, so I am not denying that there are things outside of mind. What I am saying is that anything you are going to experience, by definition, must be artificed, fabricated, manufactured, generated by the mind. This is a very radical thing. People often accept it with a little bit of investigation, right? Just what we know about neurology, science, anything like this, it becomes undeniable at a certain point. But people accept it too quickly, I think. They accept it without further investigation. They don't investigate radically what that implies. So this means, if you accept that, necessarily that you are fabricating where you are in experience. You are fabricating, as we said, the sense of perspective, of space, of scale. You are indeed fabricating much else that is rather scandalous and provocative to claim. You are fabricating the sense of time passing, for example, which is probably for another video. But, let's just use time to make the claim even sharper for now, because it is such a scandalous thing to say. But to run it through this lens, you experience time, yes? You feel you experience it? Again, based on our base rule here, if you feel you are experiencing time, it must be generated by the mind. That experience of time must be fabricated by the mind, or else it would be impossible to experience. It's a very subtle and difficult one to grapple with, but even time, yes. So anything at all, the sense of love, the sense of expansion, the sense of pain, the sense of loss, the sense of being a being, the sense of being a creature, the sense of existence, the sense of cognition, the sense that there is a mind fabricating things, anything that is at all, even hyper subtly experienceable, is fabricated and manufactured by mind. That base claim is too big in some sense to really be worked with as an overarching principle. It overrides so many of our intuitions as to be, hard to parse, but that's why we look at the parts, and we sort of get there from many different angles. So if you accept that, then you already know that perspective, which includes the sense of distance, space, and scale, are illusions. But let's look at them. So perspective. It's a good thing that I'm talking to a base audience of artists here, because you all are likely to have a better vocabulary and notion for perspective than someone who is not an artist, because there's just never been a real reason to grapple with it. So perspective, when grappled in drawing, can often feel like it is a mathematical thing. And in drawing it is. In drawing, perspective really becomes geometry, right? Some math is built in, and you can do it in a mathematical way, but being built on math and occurring on a piece of paper, you can actually resolve all of math with all of perspective without ever using a number, right? You can just do it with lines that connect in the correct way and all this. But that is not the real nature of perspective the way that we see it in the world. perspective in drawing, the way that an architect would do it or anything like that, is a useful mathematical stand-in that aligns with how we see the world. And it is under no obligation to actually align with how we see the world. If you've ever played around with a 3D modeling program, you discover quite quickly that you can ask the camera in a 3D modeling program to take on properties that are utterly unlike our real visual perception, our normal visual perception. You can open the field of view arbitrarily wide, such that you're basically seeing all around. You see everything in the scene. You can make it arbitrarily narrow. And the eye of an alien, for example, could theoretically work in such a way. It's just that ours don't. So it's like, in some sense, if I were to run my perspective drawing through that math that is possible in a 3D program where I push it way too far, in a conventional sense, everyone would say that I have done it wrong, right? It doesn't look right. It's difficult to understand. But let's say an alien that had a 280-degree field of view saw my drawing, they'd say, damn, looks perfect. Well done. Wow, you're a master of perspective, right? So it's all relative. But where we stand, the way that we see, we don't do perspective in the mathematical sense. Does perspective exist in our real visual field? Is that how the world is constructed visually, the way that it comes to us? The answer is no. It actually is not. All that is happening, all that produces your visual field and the illusion of perspective is let's remember, when it comes to visuals, all there is photons. That's it. And photons are just, these interacting fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. They just come from a light source, bounce off of objects, come to our eye. The different angles and intensities at which they arrive at our eye from the surface of objects, that's it. That's all that happens. And the utterly deterministic, geometric nature of how those things are going to get reflected by objects in the environment produces the illusion of perspective. That's it. In our visual field, all of perspective is basically just determined by occlusion, by the fact that some things are in front of others based relative to you, to your position in the scene, your imputed position in the scene. So the drawing version of perspective does not occur in your actual experience. You experience something quite different. The mathematical drawing version of perspective happens to align neatly with what that produces, and for all intents and purposes, we can say that they are one-to-one for all practical purposes, but they are not actually. Indeed, you see with two eyeballs, right? So if you close one eye and look at a point, and then close that one and open the other, you will see that the object shifts slightly, and if you open both, you get a result that is not the view from either eye. So what the hell is happening? What is this third eye that is what you're actually looking from all the time? Because the common sense way that you move through the world is not either the view from the left eye or the view from the right eye. It is something else that the mind generates, and that it's laughable how directly that can be seen by just doing that little exercise and proving to yourself over and over again that you are not interfacing with the visual impression from either eye number one or eye number two. So perspective is an illusion. That then leads us to the sub-insight from that, which is that distance is an illusion. perspective is what implies distance. Remember, scientifically speaking, all that's ever happening that is creating your visual impression, where the rubber meets the road for the visual image you're going to generate, is that a photon is striking the back of your eyeball. So it doesn't matter whether I'm looking at my dog, who's about 2 feet from my eyes, or if I'm looking at a mountain that is 8 miles away. In terms of the science, both of those sights are meeting me at the exact same place. They're both only occurring on the back of my eyeball. That's it. I impute the distance for all practical purposes. The mind looks at the visual data, right? Looks in the difference at, for example, the angles at which the photons come in. Actually, I think it's just the intensities. It's not even really the angles, I don't think. I think it's just the intensity of the wavelengths that strike the rods and cones in the back of the eye. And things like that results in a different contrast ratio, for example, between my dog and the mountain in the distance, right? My dog is going to be higher contrast, have darker darks and lighter lights than the mountain can have. The lights and shadows on the mountain are going to be closer together on the value range. And this implies, basically in a way that I cannot look past, that the mountain is much further away from me than my dog. And if you've ever tackled landscape painting, you know that that effect is aerial perspective, right? That the lowered contrast range as things go into the distance is what's going to create the illusion of depth. It works perfectly in a painting because it is what produces the illusion of depth for you in your actual visual field. But in a raw sense, it's all just happening right on the back of your eye. The convergence of perspective lines, the intensity of values also contribute to this imputed sense of distance. But as we explained in the first video, a camera is not inside its own photographs. In a very radical sense, you are only ever moving through yourself as you move through the world. And when you look at a mountain, no matter how far away it is, I'm not denying the existence of the mountain, but in terms of your experience, you're just looking at more of you. You're just looking at something you are knitting into experience, moment after moment after moment. You never interface with the experience of photons hitting the back of your eye. So distance is an illusion as well. You add it to experience. Contemplating this deeply can produce experiences where the illusion of distance does become defabricated in experience, and then you can, instead of believing it conceptually, have moments where you're like, oh right. And it's just like everything, you get it. Everything's right there. If you've had powerful drug experiences on something like psychedelic mushrooms or something like that, you may have experienced in a very forced kind of a way that truth. You may have had the drug defabricate the sense of distance, and it can be very disorienting in a drug experience in a way that it is not in a contemplative experience. But it's still there. You can have a strong experience of feeling like everything in the room has been sort of crammed together, that there's no distance between anything anymore, even if the visual perception of those things has not changed that much, right? So that's a quite common drug experience. And if you've had that, don't ignore the fact that there's data there, right? It's not just a weird thing. It is actually, there is real data in that experience. That leads us naturally into the idea that space is an illusion. If there is no real perspective, no real distance, if everything collapses down to really just being right here, space is also an illusion. Again, this is a natural outgrowth of the consolidation of the insight that you are moving through a hologram that you are generating. Space is implied, right? You don't, if all you're getting is photons on the back of your eye, there is no other option. It must be that space is implied. That space is a complex, sophisticated, subtle sense impression that your mind is knitting into experience moment after moment after moment after moment. It is built on, space is a bit harder. You can get to a space, you can get to a place pretty quickly where you sort of open up your eyes, go soft vision, remind yourself that this is all light and color shapes being presented somewhat flatly, from which three-dimensionality is implied, and experience the fact that there is no real distance, right? That everything's just there. But the sense of space can be more subtle, again, because we have that sense of, that deeply intuitive sense that we as humans locomote, that I can go from here to the bathroom, I can go from here to Japan, right? I'm not denying the existence of Japan. I'm just having fun now saying over and over again that I am not denying the existence of certain things. But that is all implied. It's something that we knit into experience. And it is supported by the visual field, but space is extra tricky because it's not just about the visual field. Because if someone is blind, and if they're blind from birth, even if they've never seen the world visually, they still impute a sense of space, right? They feel it and have it in a very sophisticated way, probably as sophisticated as somebody who has it in a visual sense. They impute the space in the world based on locomotion, right? Now, it wouldn't make sense to a person who's been blind from birth that we can look at the apartment complex across the street and guess like, that's probably 200 feet away, right? That doesn't, if you've never seen visuals, it's kind of a mystery. Like, what sense are you getting while standing here that you could know that, but a person who is blind knows that it might take them 80 paces to walk from here across the street. And that is a similar notion of space, right? It's going to take them about 10 seconds in time or 50 paces to walk from here to the bathroom, right? And in that way, they map the world very, very spatially based entirely on locomotion. So we have that under our visual perception. And we also have proprioception and the sense of balance, that is to say, which is being imputed by just fluid rolling around in your ear. So those things also support the sense of space. So just unbinding the visuals won't quite get you all the way to realizing that space is illusory, is fabricated, manufactured, generated lovingly by the mind. You also need to investigate the sense of balance, the sense of proprioception, and the sense of motion as well, because those deeply condition the sense of space. The sense of space is deeply contingent on those things as well. And we will have to look in a separate talk if it becomes relevant at some of the ways that we might unbind or look at the sense of locomotion in a very different way. And finally, the sense of scale is illusory. The sense of scale is maybe one of the easiest ones to sort of loosen up because it is supported by visual perception, but the sense of scale is extremely relativistic, and I think a lot of people just understand that on an intuitive level. So scale is basically, it hinges on comparison. And we all understand that, right? We know that a Coke can is only small in comparison to something bigger, right? It's small in comparison to me, and it's small in comparison to a car, and it's small in comparison to a mountain or something like that. But the most interesting part is, of course, to turn it on our experience. So the thing that you might want to look at here is, how do you consider your scale? Us as beings, it is just a common sense notion that I'm the normal size, right? We all feel that. That's our initial starting point, day after day, year after year. Because we are us, we base everything on us, and everything that is smaller than us is small, and everything that is larger than us is large. And these relative comparisons really do go far in our emotionality. And it's interesting that something so relative can have such a big emotional impact on us. So out on the extremes, not everybody has these emotional impacts. So let's start with not out on the extremes. A good place to look is always insecurities, right? People tend to get very insecure, like in terms of attraction, about, am I taller or shorter than somebody else? You know, am I bigger or smaller than them? Both in height and in weight, right? So if your main concern, relativistically speaking, is that you want to be thinner, then you can grow insecure about if you are bigger than someone. And you know, it's very memey these days, but like in terms of dating, you might feel that you have a preference towards only dating someone who is shorter or taller. But really they are, or let's say you might feel you have a preference for dating a tall person, right? But tall is really just entirely relativistic to you. It's like, it's that they're taller than you, right? If, let's say you feel like, oh, I want to date someone who's 6 foot, it's like, because I want them to be tall, would you still consider them tall in the way that matters to you if you happen to be 6'2"? My gut tells me no. You would then say, all right, well, they have to be higher than 6'2". So there we see the relativism, but out on the extremes, or there we see how that affects our emotions, right? But out on the extremes, it has similar effects. So we can sort of be very amused by how small things are, right? Tiny kittens are an example. Very small bugs, the worlds of small bugs. I personally love stuff like that. Like I can watch a documentary about how ants live their lives for a very long time and be fascinated. And it's just like, oh, how could such a tiny thing have such a complex society and inner world and all of this? And on the other side of the extremes, we can be plunged into awe by contemplating things like the tremendous size of the sun or black holes or other cosmological objects. The size of the earth can shoot us into a sense of awe. And I consider those useful tools. You know, I had a lot of powerful childhood experiences for me personally that now looking back, I consider them to have been meditations. I didn't know it at the time, but I used to make time as a kid to just sit and close my eyes and imagine the sheer size of the sun or a black hole until something happened, until my body and my mind started to feel different. And I really liked that. There was a sense of opening that I could not describe. I liked the way it made me feel. I didn't have the language then to understand what I was doing. Now I see that I was sort of naturally gravitating towards that contemplative exercise to sort of get me out of the small feeling of day-to-day life and to sort of put me in an altered state of consciousness. So those are useful tools. And it's amazing that that sense of scale can affect our emotions like that. But what I want to point out here is that that is ultimately an illusion. Being completely based on the relative notion that you are the normal size, that this arbitrary delivered human physiology is the normal size things should be, right? Even though when I put it that way, you would never agree to it being put that way. That's how you intuitively feel day to day. That's how you intuitively assess things day to day. You do act as if you are the normal size, right? That reveals that scale is a complete illusion. So what does that mean? That means that ants are not small because they also feel that they are the normal size. That means that trees are not big. If there's something it's like to be a tree would just feel like it is the normal size. It would not feel big. It would only feel big or small in comparison to other trees if it could have notions of other trees. It also means that the sun is not large. It's only large in comparison to you in a relativistic sense. So take it all the way out. Black holes are not large. Galaxies are not large. The universe is not large. That is a notion that is only relevant here, in a very narrow lens. This is not to take away from the startling beauty of such things. Again, like I said, contemplations like that and truths like that can be very uplifting and very useful. I am, again, not denying the fact, for example, that the galaxy has more mass in it than I do, and therefore, as a massy object, has a greater gravitational influence on the rest of the cosmos than I do. I'm not denying that. But that scientific fact is not a notion of largesse or smallness in the way that we grapple with it. Can you see that? Do you see how our sense that, oh man, I'm bigger than this guy, I should lose some weight, right? That sense of bigness, that sense of scale, or that I'm larger than my dog, is a very different sense of scale than there's more mass in the galaxy, therefore it exerts a greater gravitational influence than Stephen does, right? And then we can investigate what defines galaxy, because I'm in it, right? And I'm contributing. Even though I have less mass, I do contribute to this supposedly larger amount of mass that the galaxy has. So where do we draw the line? At what point does the mass of Stephen stop and the mass of the galaxy begin? So upon close inspection, you will find that the sense of scale is also an illusion. It is experiential, right? We naturally feel that apartment across the street is bigger than I am, right? But it is a notion, a subtle, energetic, and perceptive notion that, contingent upon visuals and cultural and emotional comparisons, is woven into experience, moment to moment to moment to moment. It's woven in, it's added, it's woven in, it's woven in, just like everything else, just like everything else. All right, everybody. I'm going to leave it there because that's about an hour of running my mouth. And if you have listened to this and you have been playing with any of these ideas, please let me know in the comments, either here on Patreon or YouTube. Feel free to just let me know about any experiences that you've had while contemplating these things, or any shifts that you've had, because they're very real, they're very available, and I think probably anybody who's had these experiences can agree that hearing the experiences of others is very uplifting, sort of makes you feel less isolated. And when others describe experiences that are quite far out, even beyond your experience, that is to say, those can be very exciting as well, because if you've had just a few big shifts, very soon you get very open-minded. You know, you hear what other people say they've gone through, and you start to feel like, yeah, that's probably possible. So when you hear a great story from somebody else, you kind of get excited, and it can reinvigorate the practice and life, really. So please feel free to regale us in the comments. All right, everybody. Take care. Happy living. Happy drawing. If you're listening to this on Patreon, which is the only place this is currently available at the time of recording, thank you for being a patron, and I will talk to you soon.